It's an issue that creates huge anxiety in Nigeria, electricity or the lack of it. In a country blighted by decades of power cuts, many Nigerians have had to get used to a world where electricity doesn't work. And as electricity bills skyrocket, are power outages about to get much worse? I'll attempt to shed light on this dark subject with Nigeria's former Minister of Power, Professor Bath Naji. He's also the founder and CEO of Nigeria's first indigenous-owned power development company. We'll find out what he's doing to improve investment and delivery in Nigeria's power sector. I'm Somna Sambo, and this is the Arise interview. Welcome to the show. Nigeria is Africa's leading oil producer with huge natural gas reserves, but the country is often hit by fuel and electricity shortages, and power outages are the norm rather than the exception. Research shows that Nigeria's power generation, which is mostly thermal and hydro, has an installed capacity of roughly 12,500 megawatts, but it is only able to deliver around 4,500 megawatts to its more than 200 million citizens. So many companies, both private and public, have tried and failed to be part of the solution. With many of its generation plants on their last legs, is there a lasting solution to Nigeria's electricity woes? Well, my guest today has a lot of experience and expertise in this area. Professor Bath Naji is Nigeria's former Minister of Power and Science and Technology. He's also the founder and CEO of Geometric Power, Nigeria's first indigenous-owned power development company. So good to have you. Prof, I mean, how have you been? I haven't been out of politics and all of that. How is the investment climate like for power in Nigeria? How have you been coping in terms of trying to attract investment to the industry?
Thank you very much, Somna, for having me on your show. Well, it's a very rough terrain for investment, but for very good projects, there's still investment coming. We labored in trenches for years, and we were able to pull off the investment in our integrated power project. So that's what it is. The problem is multi-faceted in terms of the constraints. The Naira instability is part of it, so the people not being able to find foreign exchange. The product is being sold in Naira, but all the payments, if you have, they're all coming. Exactly. So it's difficult. And even the maintenance, a lot of the turbines cannot even be maintained, cannot be properly serviced in Nigeria. You can maintain, but the major maintenance must be done abroad, spare parts from abroad, and so you have to spend foreign currency to do this.
Yeah, let's talk about the geometric power plant in Aba, and then you had this event today at the Bureau for Public Enterprises, and then it's been handed over back to you. I mean, how excited are you about this project, and what is the difference? Nigerians would want to know all of this.
We are super excited. All members of our company, and we would even say the people we built this project for, which is the Aba environment, should be excited that this event took place today. We started this project in 2004. That's when the Obasanjo administration had an MOU with our company. That is, federal government had MOU with our company. And by 2005, we had an agreement and a concession agreement to start construction of a power plant and power infrastructure. Basically, we had a model that, in terms of financing, that was different from your standard. Typically, when you're doing a power plant, you need sovereign guarantee because of the huge capital outlay. But in this case, there was no sovereign guarantee. We said, okay, concession a territory to us, we service the territory and we collect directly. So we don't need to have government have to put out so much money for sovereign guarantee. And this was accepted by federal government and it was done. And so we started construction, and 95 completed the construction of a power plant, 141 megawatt power plant, 27-kilometer gas pipeline at 12-inch gauge, substations, power lines. We'd done this by the time the privatization came.
Yeah, and starting from the EPSR, the electricity power sector reform from 2005,
yes,
way up until 2011 when there was that privatization. And I mean, a lot of persons were actually super excited with that attempt of yours to actually provide power within that cluster region of Aba. But all of a sudden, I mean, this politics came in and we just didn't know what happened, and it looked like you had fizzled out.
We didn't fizzle out. There are people who wanted to fizzle us out. Let's put it that way. What happened was that during privatization, the government at the time sold the ring fence, which, like I told you, there's no sovereign guarantee. So the actual security, financial security of our transaction of nearly $500 million was just this ring fence. Okay, they sold it. And it was, they knowingly sold it, let's put it that way. It's this government that now mediated with the buyers, and the buyers were able to come to the table and we negotiated to buy them out. And so today was actually the finalization of the process. We paid for a reacquisition of the asset, and today the government and the people who bought the asset handed back the asset to us.
Very interesting indeed.
Yes.
And one want to wonder why you had to face those kind of challenges, having been a minister of power yourself, and then you were even presidential advisor on power. If you, I mean, are facing this kind of challenge in the power sector, how would, I mean, private investors coming from elsewhere, you know, what would they do? Because, I mean, we have thought that this project should have been completed by now, but all of these intrigues and power play came into place, and isn't it too late at the moment? No,
it's many people who talk about it, who know about it, say that if I was a foreigner, that I would have cut and run, but I wouldn't, because you know, if we run away from our own country, then who stays? So we stayed and try to persuade those who can help in government to help us. And more importantly, the investors in the project, all the local banks that invested in the project stayed with us. So they didn't come to take us over. That's very, very important.
I mean, that's very important, considering how Nigerian banks behave in other sectors.
So they stayed with us. And actually, during and then an international bank, Afro-Exim Bank, came to join them this time.
Yeah, I mean, there was a $50 million facility granted you.
Yes.
And I mean, I was like, for them to have actually invested so much, then it means that the potentials are still there for this power plant.
Yeah. Oh yes. No, so yeah, they really came, joined the previous lenders. And the previous lenders were able to structure their facilities to ensure that the incoming lender was able to come in without the project interests and so on swallowing their entry. And that's very important, that the existing lenders did that, and the incoming lenders were able to see through even see that the problem that we ran into wasn't caused by us, but that it was a willful group that wanted to take the asset. We thank God, and we thank the people in government who ensured that we were able to come back.
Now let's talk about this ABAP integrated power project.
Yes.
It's a nucleus trying to provide electricity to a cluster.
Yes.
When it comes on stream, what do we expect? How different will this be compared to the national grid and all of that?
Very different. The structure from the beginning was a complete utility unto itself, semi-autonomous from the national grid. In fact, I would say that 99.9% of the time it is autonomous. It's only if it has to, something happens, which we don't foresee, then it will import power from the national grid. But more of the time, it exports power to the national grid, actually. So there's the power plant, there is the infrastructure, and it doesn't ever go on. On transmission line, the national transmission.
So you have your own transmission lines, yes, and all of that.
Yes, the distribution network that we have is it. So we put power directly to the distribution network. So at 33 kV level. So it doesn't ever go on national grid for supply. While virtually all the other power plants in the country must go on national grid, we don't. So our power goes local. And the expectation is that you cut losses. The technical losses that you could have had will be cut. You no longer have as much technical losses. So certainly no transmission losses.
Very interesting.
Then based on that, we are also ensuring that collection efficiency is introduced. Because the networks have become efficient, we've invested heavily in the distribution infrastructure.
Over the years, and this infrastructure has been there without being tampered?
Yes, actually, without being tampered.
Wow.
You see, the thing is this. When we were doing, that time when I was in government, what we said is that any company that's going to acquire the distribution company must have two characteristics. It must have a financial capacity and technical capacity. And that financial capacity is very important because the acquisition price is just by the way. You have to invest many times over the acquisition price. And in the case of ABBA, we invested about at least 8 times the cost of acquiring the asset itself. Wow. So where do you invest? You invest in ensuring that you don't have losses. You have lines. You're able to have new substations, power lines, etc. So that's the sort of thing. Very
interesting. I'll just ask you to hold on there while we go on this short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the national aspect of it now, having talked about the ABBA power grid. You're still watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with Professor Bart Naji. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Somna Sambu. On his way to winning elections in 2015 and 2019, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari made fixing the country's electricity crisis one of his top priorities. But decades of corruption and neglect have left him and those in the power sector with a huge task. According to the IMF, Nigeria loses $29 billion a year, which is about 5.8% of its GDP, thanks to a lack of reliable power supply. Nigerians also spend around $14 billion every year on power generating sets and fossil fuel. Analysts say Nigeria must adopt unconventional methods such as technology to tackle the country's electricity crisis. And I still have with me here Professor Bart Naji, who is a former Minister of Power and the head of the geometric power plants. And Prof, here we are Nigeria having a very huge challenge. Let's go to the national level now. We started the electricity reforms from 2004, 2005, the Electricity Power Sector Reforms Act. And 2011, the privatization came. We had all the discourse from 2013. A lot of Nigerians were happy that for the first time we're having a private sector coming to play a key role. But here we've got the discourse, not doing so much. The government keeps paying subsidy for power. The discos are unable to get the huge revenues that are needed to pay the electricity generators, the generating companies and all of that. And the government had to be forced to actually do a new deal with Siemens, and that is beginning to come on stream and all of that. What exactly is the problem, and how do we go from here?
Well, you may recall that I had said that any company buying the asset, the way we set it up, was that they should have technical capacity and financial capacity. Now, whereby you lack any of these, then the system is not going to work. And particularly this financial capacity, that you need funds, not the funds that you use to acquire the disco. You need funds to actually invest in the asset. You need to be able to invest in the sub-transmission lines. You need to invest in substations, because one of the reasons why power goes out is that when you have overloaded injection substation, the whole thing it just trips. This is just standard power. So you need to build enough substations to ensure that such trippings don't happen. But you also need to go lower to distribution substations and ensure that you have enough adequacy. In other words, you need to have transmission lines, or rather distribution lines, that will ensure that you are not just running through network that is not going to be efficient. And that's on the technical side. But then you need to invest in collection systems. You need to invest in all the commercial systems. And what are these?
As in how to recoup your investments, which is very critical, especially in the age of people diverting electricity and not wanting to pay bills.
You see, the meter is like an agreement between the supplier of electricity and the consumer of electricity. The meter is very simple, very straightforward. The consumers need to be metered. When they are metered, they don't complain much, okay? And you can see that prepaid meter works in Nigeria. But you need to actually get the prepaid meter. So if you can eliminate corruption in the lower level of those who are doing the collection by installing meters, by ensuring that you have efficiency at the commercial level, and that you have solve the problem of technical infrastructure, then the system will begin to work. And so that when you talk about the ATC and C losses, the average technical collection and the commercial losses, efficiency of the system, that it should begin to be lower and lower from current 50 to 60% to much lower. And that's where they can now generate funds. When power comes, you're able to collect enough to pay for power so that power can pay for fuel. Right now, the entire value chain is not working efficiently, and that's why the government steps in to provide cushion.
Which is a very huge challenge. I mean,
a huge challenge.
But the problem is that consumers want to be metered, but they don't have meters. And then the federal government comes to intervene, bringing all sorts of policies and programs on how to support these companies to actually invest in metering. But you discover that over the years, it's been very, very slow.
Yes,
it's been very
like
slow.
I said, financial capacity from the beginning. They had to have had financial capacity, which means they invest themselves. In Aba, we are not going to be asking anybody to help us with this sort of investments. We've already done much of the investments required, and we're going to meter all the consumers. That's the whole idea. And it has to come from within the company.
At your own cost?
At our own cost. Well, that's what it is supposed to be. So you do not go to ask government to provide these things. Government has limited resources. It cannot continue to be the one to provide all sorts of capacities
Yeah,
both
so,
at the generation.
and the question will now be, how did we get our privatization so wrong that discos that were supposed to come in with a lot of liquidity ended up counting on government for liquidity instead? I mean, how can we privatize the power sector and the government is still giving monies to these distribution companies and all of that?
Well, that's
a very strong question. Yeah,
strong
but
question
I mean, a lot of Nigerians
as you well know that
yeah.
I left at before this.
Yeah, and some said that was part of the fight against you and
yes.
Ensuring that you move
Everybody
out of that
knew
office.
That I will not stand for having anything but short of financial capacity and technical capacity. Now, if you want to bring in people who don't have this, then, you know, I'm not going to be there.
And unfortunately for us as a country, the discos are collapsing. Well, we have a lot of them not being able to meet up their financial dealings here and there, and the government is forced to come in. But let's talk about the issue of the Presidential Power Initiative that's ongoing. The government is looking at 25,000 megawatts. With this deal with Siemens and the German government beginning to start from last year and then much from this year. How do you foresee Nigeria's power situation in, let's say, the next decade?
Well, I think that even the 25,000 megawatts is really, that's a reasonable target, because this government can only predict based on what it has. But I had always said that the country needs to be comparing itself to Brazil, okay? Because they have comparable population. We aspire to be as industrialized. If we're going to do that, you don't do it by just talking. Energy is a critical ingredient for industrialization. That is electricity. And every country, if you go to look at the statistics of all countries that are improving their GDP, there is a consequent relationship between that and electricity increases, which means you have to continue to invest in it. So what I had always said is that at our population of about 200 million, we should have about 100,000 megawatts as target.
Yeah, but when you ask, I mean, I was at a forum where I asked that question, but the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission had to actually say that if you look at our capacity generally, considering all the generators and everything that we have, that it's also close to about 100,000. It's just that those ones are private, yes, and they are not included in the national grid calculation and all of that. Mm-hmm. How true is that?
Well, it will be true, because after all, we must have electricity, but they are in generators. But generators cost too much to operate and maintain. And that certainly should not be the way to continue to operate the country. So generators should be out. We should not continue to operate generators. You should use industrial power. They are much cheaper, more reliable, and less hassle. People shouldn't be hassling, looking for fuel. For manufacturers, the cost is somewhere between 30 to 40% of their cost of production. That's too high. Now, the outcome is that you cannot compare, your product cannot compete in the world market. You cannot. If
you're producing based on costly power. Yes. So, well, we'll have to go on this short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. You're still watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the conversations. I'm Somna Sambo, and we've been discussing Nigeria's electricity sector, investments, and all of that with Professor Bath Naji, who's Nigeria's former Minister of Power, and he's still here with me in the studio. And Prof, let's talk about that presidential power initiative. I mean, we've seen the federal government trying to see how they can increase investment in the power sector. About 1.9 billion US dollars was approved by the Federal Executive Council just in December to ensure that there's a gradual shift, and then to attain the 7,000, from 7,000 eventually you build up until 25,000. And some people say it's not enough. And we've seen other private companies also like yours investing and all of that. So like I was asking before, in the next decade, when you add up the investments by companies like yours and that of other companies that are coming in, how do you foresee Nigeria, including this 25,000 that the federal government is projecting?
I think that the country should be able to move forward in achieving power adequacy. But it requires consistency. 25,000 megawatts, that's good. Because what we have to continue to do is to eat into the space of generators, generator suppliers, and so that you have more industrial power, mostly from private sector. You see, if government can continue to stimulate private sector to invest in power generation, we will be making progress. But it really has to be done for this to happen. The government, I believe, is investing in the right place because they are not investing really in generation, except for a project like the Mambila project, which is very, very important. But government shouldn't really be doing investment in thermal power. It should just do things to support private sector investment.
So should we go more hydro? Is that what you're saying?
No.
And gas?
There's a limit even to the hydro.
Oh, interesting.
No, thermal. I'm saying that when you look at the sort of investment we've made, or the investment a company like Azura made, they didn't need government. They needed government to play its role. To
attract right investment.
To attract right investors. But you know, some of what we have seen, by having been through this, is that sometimes when you come to certain people, desk officer in various places, it's like, why should I give you this?
Bureaucracy.
Yes, but a right thinking group would say, we're excited to have you. Here is the permit or whatever that you need to make progress. And this cuts across. So I believe that government investing in, say, the distribution area, investing in ensuring that distribution systems work, but more importantly, the transmission infrastructure must be correct, so that whatever power that is generated will be wheeled to its appropriate place of use. Right now, you have places where you have stranded power in the nation.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Nigerians are surprised when they hear the government actually saying that, look, we are producing 7,000, but we are only able to wheel 4,400 or 4,500 and all of that. And people keep asking, where's the rest? I mean, because there should have been some improvement if we are generating 7,000 megawatts at the moment.
They are not actually generating the 7,000. Okay. They have availability, they have capacity to generate the 7,000. But because of constraint, they are not able to take the power through the grid. Okay, so when they say that they are able to generate that they really have capacity to generate that, but the transmission network will not take it.
Yeah, and the transmission network is in the hands of the government because it's a national asset.
Yes.
So a lot of people keep wondering what sort of support can be offered again, because since this is a national security asset and it's in the hands of the government, only the government can invest in that sector. We've seen the government actually bringing in some new transmission equipment, but how much or how fast enough should the government, be doing that so that there will be an improvement for both the GENCOs and the distributors?
Well, we have to be looking at the speed with which the generation, where you should have for generation, you should have more transmission capacity than generation. and distribution should have more distribution capacity than transmission. That's just simple logic of it. But whereby you have less transmission capacity than generation, that's a problem. And when you have less for distribution, that's even a bigger problem. So it must be like that, so that the system would be able to work. And investment, government should invest where it should, which is like where you're talking about. You're talking about transmission infrastructure, that a transmission system should be open network, an open system. You generate, you put on a national grid. The transmission company gets a fee paid for wheeling your power to location. The distribution company takes the power. So, and government provides this open network for taking power to wherever. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and let's talk about the power mix that we have in the country. Do you think that the country is actually investing so much in different power mix, or we are fixated on just this hydro because we keep doing Zungeru? We have Mambila, we have Shiroro, of course, the Kainji and all of that, which are there. And of course, you have the other thermal plants that are coming on board and all of that. Should we have more of renewable energy being also brought in? Because like the one that was started in Katsina, I mean, that wind farm is just there. It hasn't taken off fully. And then a lot of people say we can do more solar. We can take a lot of towns, or even like in the nation's capital, Abuja here, you could actually leave the city center on the national grid and then take out the satellite towns using solar and all of that. Why does it look like we are not investing in so much of all of this electricity mix?
Well, I like our dreams. You know, it's good to dream about renewable energy. It's very important to know that you need to have base power. Base power will be power that you can call on anytime, and it will not fail you. And that's why you get hydro and thermal. That is the natural gas power.
More reliable.
They're there all the time, okay? But think about what happens with solar. At night, where do you get the solar? You don't have. Okay, if it is wind, if the wind is forceful, then yes, you have it. If you don't have it, then so you notice that in some of the countries that now rely a lot on renewable, like Scandinavian countries, or in some parts of Europe, that by the sea, where you have strong wind, you can do wind energy very well. You can even do it in Nigeria along the shores, and you have forceful wind. Solar, yes, we are here on the equator, so we can do it.
Especially the northern parts of the country.
Yes.
A lot of people keep wondering why there's low investment in solar.
Yes, but it is cost per kilowatt hour. The solar has to deliver upon completion cost per kilowatt hour. But you have to have proper mix, whereby during that period when you are not able to get solar power, that you can get power from elsewhere. And some people will say to me, I'm sure that some people will be saying, but you have batteries. Yes, you can. But the technology has not improved enough to be able to store enough capacity to support when you don't have the sun. These are things that we have to be done. But I certainly support the idea of renewable energy, but not without the base power. You have to have the base power. So we must be doing.
Let's look at gas. I mean, we keep flaring lots of gas,
yes,
and we've got the government saying that we are more of a gas country than and even crude oil producing country and all of that. How much of investments do we need to have gas converted into power for Nigerians? And is it becoming attractive to private investors? What sort of environment do we need to attract more investments using gas to actually push power to Nigerians?
Well, for liquefied natural gas, it's quite attractive. So if you liquefy and you export, but also it may become more increasingly attractive to have either compressed natural gas or liquefied natural gas for local consumption. Now, investment in gas is going to increasingly become more profitable because if the country actually does what it should do in terms of investment in power, then you need gas to do it. Gas is where you have a very huge increase.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing investment like the AKK gas pipeline project by the NNPC, which is super expensive, and we have to get the Chinese to invest. But how much more of those kind of investments do we need, considering how you would have to take gas all around the country and the security of the pipeline and all of that? I mean,
yeah, the security of the pipeline, yes. But you know, it's only vandalism that makes gas transportation unsecure, because natural gas is like nearly like air. So if you're going to puncture the line, then you're endangering yourself. You're not going to harvest it for any other use other than vandalism, really. So that's the only thing that you have to understand. It's not like refined fuel, refined oil, which people can tap and they go and sell
and all of that.
Yes.
This one just fizzles out into the air.
Yes, but this the natural gas investment is very, very important in the country because it's definitely a way for us to achieve success. The hydro, we can do so much with hydro. And if we're able to get the long-running Mambila project, that's a huge win. Zungeru, you know, all those. But we have to actually get them done. And more importantly, as we get them, that we should plan for evacuation infrastructure. What we planned before was a super grid, 765 kV network, looping the country, so that a power plant like Mambila should go straight to it. So I am not sure, I'm not in government, so how much the plan that is made for evacuation of the Mambila. Okay. And it has to go beyond perpetual plan.
Yeah, policies here and there and all of that. But do you think Nigerians are actually willing to pay for more power if they actually have it? Because we've been seeing distribution companies also complaining that people circumvent metering systems and all of that. Do you think that if all of this makes works very well, Nigerians are willing to pay for power at a higher cost?
I will ask you, if you are not getting industrial power, and you are getting power from your generator, and you get power that is that has regulated price, which one would you take? Your generator power or regulated industrial power?
Very interesting. I'm very sure our
viewers, you understand.
Our viewers will have
because really, the answer is very simple. When the price is right, instead of paying nearly double, but people don't know that the power coming from generators costs nearly double in comparison to that of industrial power.
Very interesting indeed. Yeah. And just quickly before we go on this break, do you think that Nigerians who are willing to be able to invest in these power systems and all of that will get more funds from the domestic financial market? Because I mean, your own geometric power plant was able to get lots of investment, but we are seeing banks shying away from investing in those areas because of maybe the issues of returns. That's why I've seen also discos packing up and all of that. Do you think that Nigerian financial institutions are still willing to invest more in this sector?
I don't think so. I think that the Nigerian financial institutions rushed into to do the privatization, and the capacity, many of the banks have topped their capacity to invest in power. You know, a bank can't invest only in one sector. So it must distribute. I don't know whether it is by law or by the way they are structured. They have to distribute their investments and diversify their investments. So the banks many of them have topped up in power investment. Oh. So if you really are talking about major investment, then the environment has to be attractive enough to attract international investment in power.
All right.
Yes.
We'll have to go on this short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Somna Sambo, and my guest today is the engineer, innovator, and CEO, Batinaji. He was the Minister of Power in Nigeria in 2011 and was also the Minister of Science and Technology. But he's also very successful away from his roles in the Nigerian government. He's said to be the first black man in the U.S. history to be bestowed with the title of Distinguished Professor of Engineering, and is the first African to become Director of the United States National Science Foundation. He's also credited as one of the inventors of the e-design concept, and I still have him here with me. Let's talk about the e-design concept and what that actually means.
Okay. The e-design concept is a system where you are able to design any product, mostly, of course, mechanized products like automobiles, airplanes, robots. You can design this remotely. You don't have to be sitting together to do design. As you know, like an automobile has more than 4,000 components, an aeroplane more than 6 million components. So all these various companies design the components and put them together. The tolerances required for them to be together, to look the way they do, very, very tiny tolerances. So in doing the design, you have to work on the geometry of these components, and you have to be able to put them together. You have to be able to simulate them, and including aerodynamic simulation of them in motion, like a car moving, an airplane flying. So all this will be done in the computer. For example, Boeing 777 was the first airplane so built without having to build a prototype, because in the past they used to build physical prototype and try it. So, but now all these things are done by computer, and it's technologies that came from e-design that allow these things to be done in the computer. So we, yes, I ran we started a National Center of Excellence on e-design. 5 universities were involved, over 100 professors were involved in it, and you can imagine how many postgraduate students, master's, PhD students, and fellows. So I was head of it, and we now it continues to run, even though when I left. About 7 universities now are involved in it. So these are major universities in America. So that's what e-design is about. Very
interesting submission indeed. And let's talk about, I mean, the political atmosphere in Nigeria here. I mean, you must have reckoned with the fact that there are agitations for a Southeast presidency and all of that. And you happen to be from the Southeast. We've seen lots of intellectuals, I mean, CEOs like you, just quiet and just watching. What have you thought about the political climate as the country heads to the 2023 presidential election? The succession presidency we're heading to. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't see why someone from the Southeast should not be president. And actually, the question we should be asking ourselves in Nigeria is, do we really want someone at the helm that will be able to deliver what Nigeria wants, to be able to compare with all the other prime ministers, presidents of the world, so that decisions that are made, both economic, political, all decisions are of that standard, I mean, that's really what the bottom line is.
Yeah, and I was surprised that a lot of intellectuals like you, CEOs, are shying away from politics. I mean, if we are to get someone of your capacity in politics and then vying for that very top position, don't you think a lot of Nigerians will actually have a change of mind? Because
perhaps.
Yeah, so why don't we have more of you in politics?
Well, I mean, because you know, when you look at the terrain, people who want it so badly because maybe some of them are not doing the sort of things we're doing. So you just leave them.
Well, you have another professor like you as vice president of the country. What do you think of
God.
Intellectuals in government, actually? Well, I mean, you were a former minister, a former presidential advisor. What sort of experience did you encounter while in government that others like you should learn while coming in?
I always, each time I come into government, well, I've been in the government a few times. You know, sometimes when I sit and I realize, actually, I've been more than I wanted to. I try to focus on what I am there to do. When I came to be Science and Tech Minister in '93, there was no Ministry of Science and Technology. It was abolished. I had to restart that ministry. A decree was made. I worked with the then Attorney General Akpangbo, and we stitched together what you now know as Ministry of Science and Technology. And what I wanted was to say to Nigerians that this is what Ministry of Science and Technology should do in your life. And that's what it should be doing, that it should be able to lead from basic science to technology to commercial product. If it's not doing that, then it's not doing what it's supposed to do. That's on that. In Ministry of Power, we needed to transition, do the reform. So the reform was actually made during Obasanjo's time, but somehow didn't get implemented. So we dusted it from where it was and started implementing it. It was just ours was not to make the reform, because it had already been done, but to implement. And so each time I come in, I focus on the job and don't allow distractions.
And it looks like you always offend lots of people.
And I'm prepared to offend somebody.
Because I mean, your last experience wasn't really interesting.
No, there are so many people that.
And I mean, we had several international media houses, you know, pouring out emotions out there when you were. I mean, when you had to resign, and a lot of people were like, "We've lost someone who's supposed to actually do these reforms and all of that."
Economist magazine had a full page that week.
Yeah, I mean, I read it and I really felt bad for the country, but that's politics. But how do we go from here? How do we change things as we head to the next election?
We have to not let up. We have to find right people in the right place all the time. You have to, because that's really what the country needs. I can tell you that whenever you have ministers in different areas that are competent, the country will move, okay? If you have a head of state that is, doing what he's supposed to do, the country moves. You have governors that are doing what they are supposed to do, the country continues to grow. That's what it is. Leadership is very important.
Well, we do not have enough time more to continue this very good conversation, but I can only wish to have people like you in politics, and we just hope you take up the challenge or you even groom others. Professor Bath Naji, CEO of Geometric Power Limited and former Minister of Power in Nigeria, must thank you for joining us on the Arise interview. Well, that's how it's been for this edition of the Arise interview. Do join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Goodbye and thank you for watching. I'm Samna Sambo.